Metro on 101.9 WDET-FM. I'm Tia Graham.
And I'm Kerry Jr. II, in for Robin Vincent. Today on the program, with trade tensions heating up between the U.S. and Canada, a new campaign aims to find connections through tourism.
As well, Detroit and Windsor share more than an international border. The two share a love of jazz.
A Canadian musician stops by to talk about the Electric Avenue International Jazz Festival.
Plus, food insecurity remains a persistent problem. How might the Big Beautiful Bill impact SNAP benefits and access to food assistance?
Investigative journalist Tracy McMillan will lay it out. But first, since October 7th, 2023, the world has felt different for a lot of American Jews. Much of that is related to Israel's ongoing conflicts in the Middle East. For almost 2 years, Israel has been responding to Hamas' brutal attacks in Gaza. Results have been devastating for Palestinians. About 55,000 people have been killed from that war. And starvation has become a profound issue after Israel's months-long food aid blockade a few months ago. This is an ongoing problem, as Israel has been striking food aid centers, which happened just 2 days ago, killing 74 people. In America, Jews generally support the Jewish majority country that is Israel, but there are some who feel that, whether they feel kinship with Israel or not, that country needs to be held accountable. That's true for members of Jewish Voice for Peace. A number of people in the anti-Zionist group are currently fasting in order to call attention to the starvation happening in Gaza. To discuss that now, we have Ruby Shapiro here. They are a member of the local Detroit chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace. Ruby, welcome to the Metro.
Good morning. It's good to be here.
Thank you for joining us. So Ruby, just to start off, you are a part of this movement of members from Jewish Voice for Peace who are fasting. Why is that? Why are you fasting?
Absolutely. We're fasting to have a conversation around the blockade of food entering Gaza, which, as you mentioned, began on March 2nd and is leading to famine conditions. Now, we know famine is a political issue. It's not a material issue, and it's one that can be stopped immediately. So we're fasting in order to have this conversation, to do something beyond the normal that we can use to go and talk to our communities about what's going on. And also as an act of embodied solidarity. I can say in my experience of 2 days fasting as part of this organization and citywide rolling fast, it has kind of highlighted the urgency of this situation for me and has reminded me to stay active in my efforts and to not give up hope because, while I make the choice to fast, people in Gaza do not.
Break that down for me. You said in your 2 days of fast. How does the fast work? How many days does it last?
Absolutely. So beginning on June 14th, members of JVP Detroit, our supporters, and the broader Jewish and Solidarity community in Metro Detroit have began a rolling fast. That means members have made a commitment to continue this rolling fast throughout the period going on from June 14th. And we aim to continue until we're able to sit down and have a meeting with Senators Slotkins and Peters and demand, one, an end to the food blockade against Gaza, and two, that they demand an end to U.S. Military aid and arms sales to Israel until this horrific genocide in Gaza comes to an end.
You said a rotating fast, you during 2 days. So that means everyone's taking a turn, right? You said throughout this time that you all are fasting, everyone's rotating.
That's right.
How many of you are there?
Currently, we have 30 to 40 people signed up to fast, and through publicity events that we're doing, both in social media and flyering and holding public meals and discussions in real life, we've been growing that network. We believe that with symbolic actions like this rolling fast, the importance is the conversation and the publicity we're able to generate. And as an organization, we didn't feel that having a few members from our chapter engage in a prolonged hunger strike would be politically expedient, whereas our comrades in Chicago have been on a continuous hunger strike for, I believe, 10 days, since they are more able to mobilize around this issue.
And why a fast? Why is that the act that you all chose to use? Why not a different form?
Absolutely. I think the fast draws attention to the profound famine and food crisis that's going on in Gaza. It is a really direct and concrete symbol of that starvation, and it's something that we can point to and say, we're doing this for a day, but imagine if this had been going on since March 2nd, more than 60 days from now. It's a very concrete tie, and we're able to use it to start that conversation with people. Because when you show up to a family function, and with the 4th coming around, there's going to be a lot of barbecues and cookouts in the city, If you show up and you don't eat, that makes a statement, and it's one that starts a conversation at this moment when public attention is waning around the horrific conditions and the genocide being perpetrated in Gaza.
So what kind of conversations are you trying to have? You want to start conversations. What are they about? What are you talking to people about? And what are you trying to get them to understand? Is it about specifically the starvation that's going on in Gaza, or is it more than that?
Absolutely. It is a prop to have these conversations and to talk broadly about what we see as Israel moving very far away from our Jewish values, and in particular, the statement that I grew up with as a Jew who got a lot of Holocaust education, which is never again for anybody. And we feel that now what's going on in Gaza is the modern day Holocaust, and that we need to have these conversations in our community. We're responsible as Americans because American political support makes this possible, and we are acutely responsible as Jewish people because this is being done in our name. So we want to highlight the contradictions and what we see as hypocrisy in the American Jewish community and have this conversation. Concretely, we're calling people to contact their senators and elected representatives, as I mentioned, to call for an immediate end to the blockade of humanitarian aid and to allow it to resume on international terms through UNRWA, and also to end all arms sales and military aid to Israel. So that's the outcome that we would like to come from this situation.
And you also mentioned that you all want to directly communicate with our elected officials, right?
Absolutely.
I have a question about that. So the Democratic Party voters are generally more sympathetic to help Palestinians in preventing America from selling arms or aid to Israel. But there are plenty of people in the Democratic Party who don't want to criticize Israel or withhold our military arms from that country. Is there leadership in either party that you're supportive of right now in order to stop the humanitarian crisis that's going on?
Absolutely. I want to highlight the good work highlight the good work being done by Congresswoman Rashida Tlaib and also Senator Bernie Sanders, and a few other senators who have advanced these motions calling for an immediate end to military support and arms sales to Israel and calling for an end on the blockade. So there are a few elected leaders in the Democratic Party, and they are indicative of the will of the broad base of Democratic voters. Supermajorities of Democrats support the end of the blockade to Gaza and support an end to military aid to Israel. We're calling on these Democratic leaders to adopt the will of the base and to actually make democracy real in the United States.
You mentioned Alyssa Slotkin earlier. Last week, the Metro asked Senator Alyssa Slotkin about whether the U.S. should be doing more to support Palestinians and hold Israel accountable. Here was her response.
I think that in general, there's a major shift going on in both parties on national security. I think Democrats are figuring out what they believe the role of America should be in the world, and so are Republicans, right? The Republicans broke into kind of open warfare about the Iran strike, between the isolationists and those who wanted to do the strike. I think there's a big mixing bowl going on what America's role should be. And certainly President Trump has confused people, I think, the last couple of weeks on what we thought his view was and maybe how that's changing.
All right, Ruby, so what do you make of that? And what do you want our representatives, or like Alyssa Slotkin, I know you kind of echoed it before, but what do you think they should be doing more of?
Absolutely. I mean, I think Senator Slotkin's comment kind of shows the broad de-alignment and realignment that's happening. And we're calling on our elected leaders like Senator Slotkin to take a decisive and moral stand. And frankly, it's not controversial to say genocide is wrong, forced starvation is wrong. And we want to see her take a clear and decisive moral stand with the people of Gaza, with the people of Palestine, and also with the majority of her voters in the Democratic Party.
You're listening to The Metro on 101.9. I'm Kerry Jr. II. My guest right now is Ruby Shapiro. Ruby is a member of the Detroit chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace. Members of the group are fasting right now to raise awareness of the food scarcity crisis in Gaza. Ruby, I want to turn to your personal experience as a Jewish person who is critical of Israel. That's not the stance of many Jewish people, particularly of the older generations. How did you first become critical of the country?
Absolutely. So growing up, I grew up in a secular Jewish family, and our main kind of ties to Judaism were one, Holocaust remembrance, and two, what I see as a reflexive allegiance to the state of Israel. As I grew older and kind of fell into the question everything phase of my life, I was very fortunate to have two kind of role models in my life. First was my high school English teacher, who took us on a more kind of critical examination of the history of empire and imperialism. And second, I was very lucky to have a Palestinian classmate in high school who had the grace to sit down and kind of help me question and examine some of the beliefs that I had inherited from my family. And that kind of led to me disinvesting myself from Judaism because I grew up with this belief that support for Israel was the kind of one of the central tenets of Judaism. And it's only recently as my spiritual life has kind of reopened and I've had the example of anti-Zionist Jews, principally in the Jewish Voice for Peace, but also my local congregation that has allowed me to open up and kind of reaffiliate myself.
I wanted you to go in that deeper. You said you had a Palestinian classmate. What were those conversations like that you all had? And if you can kind of take us there and let us know like how you began to unpack what you already knew as a child, what you were reared to believe, to really open your mind up to a different perspective. How did that happen?
Absolutely. So I grew up with the line, the famous title of the book, a land without a people for a people without a land. First and foremost, this belief that the land we call Israel today had no native inhabitants. And he was able to sit down concretely and show me his lineage and say, my people have been here since like times uncountable. And that was a major fissure for me. And then also kind of to concretely talk through the history of what Palestinians call the Nakba, or the forced displacement of Palestinians from the land known as Israel. And he was able to concretely put a human face on what I had grown up believing was kind of this undifferentiated and uncivilized people, which I'm ashamed to admit, but I think is important to say openly.
Well, yeah, that's powerful for you to say openly. What about conversations with your family members or friends who disagree with you on this issue?
Absolutely. I personally feel like it's hard to organize within my family because there are so many different relationships and ties and interpersonal conflicts and this deep well of love. For the most part, this has been kind of a détente in my family. A few years ago, I had a good conversation with my cousins on BDS, but I haven't made as systematic of an effort with my family as I have in other places, and it's kind of existed as this elephant in the room. It's something that I can kind of point to, and it's definitely been like a fissure or this tension that's lied under the surface at a lot of my family gatherings. And I'm sad to say that it's led to me pulling back from a lot of my engagement with my family, and like some of that emotional intimacy that we used to have feels closed off over sort of the fissures that have resulted from the crisis in Palestine kind of, forcing the issue.
Politics can often kind of get in the way of family and familial relationships. Can you just explain to me from your perspective how you balance the importance of your political stance on issues like this with the relationships of the people who raised you and took care of you throughout your life? Like, how do you balance that and reconcile the fact that you have to pull away by justifying your political stance?
Absolutely. I mean, I think my family ties is kind of indicative of my broader politics, which is this commitment to universal love and this care to humanity. And so the same way that I feel strongly for the people in Palestine, I feel very strongly for my family members who I believe are walking into kind of like a moral abdication. Like, I don't have a savior complex about it. I'm not an evangelical, but I do still feel a responsibility to stay in community with my family and stay in conversation so that even if I'm not able to convince any of my older relatives, for my younger cousins, I can show that there is a proud and dignified Jewish existence that doesn't involve allegiance to Israel. And it's my fervent hope that as opinion continues to shift, that I can be a positive role model for the next generation in my family, kind of characterized by my younger first cousins.
The Metro recently spoke to a professor of American Jewish Studies at the University of Michigan, and he spoke about how a number of Jewish activists for Palestinians were using Jewish traditions like Passover to advocate on behalf of Palestinian lives.
There were a number of Jewish college students who became very active in the pro-Palestinian movement. They were participating in the encampments and so forth. And all of a sudden, in the encampments, they began to observe Jewish rituals. They began to have a Shabbat dinner, or they held these Passover seders. And it was meaningful to them in ways it had never been. Some of them maybe had never even participated in these kind of rituals.
You've kind of mentioned this earlier, but I want you to describe at least the process by which this was facilitated, and that is your proximity to your Jewish identity or your Jewish faith. How it seems like what you said before is that you've gotten stronger, you've gotten a renewed sense of faith in it, but like, how did you facilitate that and then learning about, this newer perspective?
Absolutely. So as I said, I came to anti-Zionism before kind of my spiritual awakening, but I think my spiritual awakening has really reaffirmed and facilitated my commitment to the struggle. One of Jewish Voices for Peace's goals is Judaism beyond Zionism, and that means that we are not just struggling for the rights and dignity of Palestinian and a just peace in the Middle East. We are also trying to find a new image for Judaism and a new and creative Jewish spiritual and cultural life. And I think that quote that was just played highlights that, is that for me, I'd already been frum, I'd already been religious and attending services, but for so many people who I have met in this movement, this has been the first time that they've felt like they've belonged and been welcomed into like a spiritual or a religious context. And I think that's a very beautiful and positive aspect, is that I think this has led to a lot of creative renewal in American Jewish life beyond what I see as reflexive Zionism.
Anti-Semitism has risen. More recently, 2 people were shot dead outside a Jewish museum in Washington, D.C., and a man with a flamethrower in Colorado attacked Israeli hostage advocates. Do you think there's a connection between Israel's attacks in Gaza and attacks on Jewish people here in America? Do you think they're all connected, or do you think they're connected at all?
Absolutely. I think when you have a state that is committing what almost the entirety of the world sees as a genocide and war crimes, and they say they're doing it in the name of all Jews, that makes us look bad. I mean, I think Israel is one of the major threats to Jewish safety in this world, precisely because they are kind of destroying the moral character and standing of the Jewish people. And I see this rise in violence as absolutely related. If you see a people committing genocide, committing the modern day Holocaust, you're going to be called to action. And I resolutely condemn stochastic terrorism. I mourn for the people who have died and been harmed in these attacks. But I definitely see a connection there. And also, I want to speak to the weaponization of anti-Semitism and this conflation of criticism of Israel and criticism of war crimes committed by the state of Israel with anti-Semitism. I think it's profoundly anti-Semitic to conflate Israel with Judaism, especially when Israel is committing these horrific crimes against humanity. That is not our Jewish values.
Does anti-Semitism worry you at all right now as a Jewish American?
Personally, no. I feel very safe in my community in Detroit. I currently live in the North End. I have a few Jewish neighbors, and I have a lot of Black neighbors, and I've had a lot of really beautiful conversations about this conflict. Shout out Peggy if you're listening. And no, I think that people are kind and intelligent and compassionate, and especially in Detroit with a history of segregation and racial violence, there is a widespread knowledge that racial persecution and persecution of ethnic minorities is not the city we want to live in. That's not the Detroit that we're proud of. So no, I don't personally feel threatened by anti-Semitism. Now, with the growth of neo-Nazi and white supremacist groups in the United States who do traditionally target Jews, I am very threatened by that. And I advocate all these people who pay lip service to growing anti-Semitism to focus their efforts there and not for brave protesters, many of whom are Jewish, criticizing the state of Israel and calling for the end of the genocide.
All right, Ruby Shapiro is a member of the Detroit chapter of Jewish Voice for Peace. Members of the organization are fasting to raise awareness of the food crisis in Gaza. Ruby, thank you very much for telling your story and for sharing your stance here on the Metro.
Thank you so much, and thank you for not letting this issue fall into silence.
WDET has weathered many challenges and changes in government priorities, but we've always had one constant, and that's you, our listeners. Now, with looming threats to federal funding, we're asking for you to help again. Let's build a stronger WDET together. We're aiming for 1,000 additional members to reinforce our future. Join us at wdet.org/give and spread the word. Coming up next, tourism is declining in Canada, and a new campaign is trying to change that. We'll be right back on the Metro. Stay right there.